Tina coming back in?
Probably, but
Okay.
we'll certainly start
Sorry.
better, yeah.
Okay, we're going to call this, the academic committee meeting to order. Today is October 30th, 2019, and if we could stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could, first thing on the list we need to do is approve the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor? All right, thank you. No public comments today. And we are going to continue our discussion of birth to grade 5 literacy.
The minutes.
Oh, sorry, I jumped right over here. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I jumped
Oh,
right
it
over
is.
it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah.
Mel. We need to approve the October 16th meeting minutes.
I move.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. I just jumped right over them. I'm so excited to get on with this topic. Hi there.
Hi.
Come join us.
Well, I'm gonna actually be getting up in a minute because I have to pick up my daughter, so I will
Okay.
join you when I return again. Jody's on her way, so.
Okay, all right. So now, any public comment?
No.
Okay. So now we're gonna go on to the discussion, the continuation of the discussion of birth to grade 5 literacy.
Okay, so previously we went over,
Do you want my number for
I didn't have
Waiver?
a clicker. Did you have a
I do
clicker?
not have a clicker, I'm sorry.
I didn't do a clicker, so
You can-
I'll
you just,
Okay.
okay.
I'm
So-
just scrolling as you tell me.
That's good. We previously discussed Born to Read, which was our birth through the hospital program where children receive the first book. We got to the point of Reach Out and Read, where our pediatricians are working in the community to, at every well baby visit, the child receiving their first book, oftentimes given while they're waiting on the pediatrician, so that parent is reading to their child, and the nurse is talking about how to read, those types of things. And we got to the Parents as Teachers program, where we had a lot of discussion about what the parent educators were doing in the community. So this program is serving children birth to 5, primarily focusing on our teen moms, our most at-risk parents. And they're going into the homes anywhere from 2 to 4 times a month and working on school readiness skills. So, and also social support. So, if, the basic needs, WIC, Medicaid, food stamps, and then, then working on the school readiness and child development skills. So our next program that we're looking at is the Beaufort Jasper EOC Head Start and Early Head Start program. So this is something we formalized about 8 to 10 years ago, where we moved all of our Head Start and Early Head Start programs into our school buildings. So at Davis Early Learning Center, we have 6-week-old babies through kindergarten, with Early Head Start serving the 0 to 3-year-olds, and then Head Start program serving the 3 to 5-year-olds. And then we have pre-K and then kindergarten as well. St. Helena is set up that as well, so we're still on Head Start, sorry, Robert. At St. Helena Early Learning Center, we have 6-week-old babies through pre-kindergarten, and then they go over to kindergarten for the big building. And currently, we're at Beaufort Elementary, 3 and 4-year-olds, and then Shanklin Elementary, 3 and 4-year-olds. And then we jump across the river and go to Hilton Head Early Childhood Center. They're not currently in that building. They are located in the Sandalwood apartment complex, very close to Hilton Head Early Childhood Center. And then I just received notice that they are expanding into the Boys and Girls Club, or the PALS building over on Hilton Head. And so that's hopefully opening up in January. So this program right here is serving our most at-risk children in the community. This is a federally funded program that you are qualified on based off your income. So our lowest socioeconomic level students are served through Head Start. Currently, there's a very large waiting list. They have about over 300 or more on the waiting list to get in. We serve about 400 in Beaufort County, and then they're serving about 100 over in Jasper County. When we formalized this project, we aligned our systems. So we were able to track a child birth through the 12th grade if they're attending a Head Start program. So we can show data of where they were at birth, and then when they graduate, we haven't gotten that far in the system yet, but we'll be able to show growth over the last 12 years starting at birth, or I guess 19 years, whenever you're graduating, 18. Curriculum and instruction are aligned, our assessments are aligned, we do joint professional development, and we provide comprehensive services through this program. So not only just the center-based preschool program, but family education, GED, family literacy programs as well.
Ashley, can I ask a couple
Sure.
questions? Okay, so I guess the basic premise, though, that I've been wondering about since the presentation 2 weeks ago is, what is our state mandate? The Beaufort County School District is mandated to instruct whom?
Kindergarten, starting at kindergarten through 12th grade. The regulation states that we are to serve a pre-K program, one half-day program in the entire district.
That's all the state mandates
Correct.
Beaufort County, a school district to do.
Well, that's Beaufort County. So there are some counties in South Carolina that receive different types of funding to serve all of their 4-year-olds or a majority of their 4-year-olds. Right now, Beaufort County doesn't qualify for that funding.
Was that part of that Abbeville lawsuit?
Yes, it's the Judge
lawsuit?
Cooper's ruling of Abbeville suing the state, yes.
Right, and so is that the CDEP?
CDEP.
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 Yes, Child Education Reading Pilot Program, but it's no longer a pilot, so they dropped one of the Ps.
Okay, so they fund those schools, but the state of South Carolina only funds one pre-K program for Beaufort County.
They fund more than that, but the requirement is only one.
But the requirement.
So from the state, we just received the allocation, it's about $700,000 from the state funding that funds the pre-K programs.
700,000. What does it come down? What is that per pupil?
Should have asked you that.
Well, what
We
does
can
it
do
cost?
that. Let me keep this in mind.
Okay,
Keep this in mind.
that's right.
So
So you get 700,000.
we get approximately $700,000 from state EIA funding. Okay, and that's 340. That's the 340. We fund pre-kindergarten in this district, Title I, local tax dollars, general fund, and 340. So, and our state funding, which is about 700. So the state is only giving us approximately 700,000. So
What
I
percentage?
don't have the breakout of how many children that can serve.
What part of the total funding is it, you know?
Yeah.
All the other components.
It's small compared to Title I. No, that's the largest pot.
When we did the math to figure out how much funding we needed though to meet all the pre-K in the county, it was 5.4
Yeah,
million.
you gave us that
Yeah.
last time.
No,
But
it's-
we didn't
we're-
get the cost on per student,
It was
it was 8 million.
8 million to serve every
Everyone.
4-year-old in the county. So a little over 8 million. That funding was drawn up, the projected cost was drawn up a couple years ago. So when we did our last projections, we were looking at close to 9 million for everybody to attend a pre-K program. But that's,
That include buildings and,
no, that's just funding the teacher and the startup cost of the
The
classroom.
teacher classified and the startup classroom, not including facility.
So when you're looking at a pre-K classroom, when I'm looking or proposing to add a pre-K classroom in the district, I'm using about $95,000 for the projected cost of a teacher and an assistant. And then a startup cost of a pre-K classroom is about $20,000 to include furniture, curriculum, and learning
And
materials.
Montessori for pre-K would be 25 grand.
So where my thought process is going on this is, you know, I agree that children need stimulation when they're little. I mean, you know, these are formative years. They need their basic needs met, but they also need to start building those synapses and grow, you know, doing all that stuff. But what is our responsibility? Where does the private come in? If we are not mandated by the state to supply, you know, if we're not mandated by the state to provide you know, where can we,
That's
what
a
about the
conversation,
private?
we actually had that earlier today,
Okay.
to look at from the point of funding
Mm-hmm.
and to the point of really K, right?
Right.
K to pre-K, since we're really not funded in that
We're
domain.
not.
To start identifying the resources that we receive. That's actually a conversation we started just a few hours ago today, because if you're looking at that, serving the full need of a child, and we're getting our funding at, let's just say, 4 years old, where are we gonna tap on from actually birth and actually
Right.
pre-birth, to be direct, because that came up as well, to that point of when we receive funding. Who is out there, what are we getting, who are our resources?
So we work collaboratively through the Early Childhood Coalition, so that's the Beaufort County Early Childhood Coalition, to provide resources to private child care providers, such as trainings, professional development, help with curriculum and instruction, those types of things, traveling preschool bus, in order to provide resources, but we are not mandated to start serving a child until 5 years old.
Yeah.
Now, we are, under the special education rules, we are required to serve 3-year-olds, but those are our most high needs children. So we do have early childhood special education for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. But keep in mind, Beaufort County is still only serving the most at-risk children in pre-K. So children that fall below the 50th percentile developmentally and/or have risk factors determined by the state that would qualify them for a pre-K program.
Okay, so it's below the 50th percentile according to what the dial 4?
Correct.
The dial 4?
Correct.
Is there also an associated economic scale along
Yes.
with that? So where would those, if those parents fell, like, let's just say that the parents are quite wealthy,
Right.
but their child has developmental delays and falls
Absolutely.
below the 50th percentile.
We are still
Would they
serving them.
qualify?
Yes. Yes.
So there is no monetary, so do those parents pay anything?
No.
So I'm coming around to it.
Yep.
Do we have students out there that are below the 50th percentile whose parents cannot afford to be in a program such as this, to receive services, yet they can't get in because that slot is filled with someone whose parents could afford? Why is there not a monetary?
So currently, we have expanded pre-kindergarten to the point where we are able to serve all the children that fall below the 50th percentile and those who are qualifying with social economic factors as well. So there are currently no waiting list in Beaufort counties for a child to
If
go
they
into.
qualify.
If they qualify for pre-K, they are able to go. Now,
Okay.
they may all not go to their home school, especially in the Bluffton cluster,
Okay.
but they are provided a pre-kindergarten program.
So there's no waiting list, we have no need to expand in that area.
We are looking at that on a yearly basis. So
Uh-huh.
every year I meet with Dr. Stratus and Dr. Rodriguez to project the following school year. We will be projecting a couple new classrooms for next school year, especially in the Bluffton area. My goal would be to get them all at their home school. Now, we set the 50th percentile threshold.
If we went to the 70th,
That's a problem.
So keep this in mind. If we move to the
To the
70th
70th.
percentile and below, so now
that's a part of .4.
we are now serving children 50th or 70th percentile and below. We have mixed ability levels now in classrooms, which is a good thing. But capacity-wise, we would need to look at some space for those classrooms.
Which then
No
leads me down the
space
other
south.
road.
No spell, no
Yeah,
space.
our space to the south is limited, our space to the north is greater.
And if we're not really mandated to serve them financially by the state, this district has made the decision, past boards of education have made the decision to, would preschoolers, pre-K actually displace building-wise, so therefore we need to add on. So are we taking classrooms, using it for pre-K, when those classrooms are actually needed for K through 12?
I don't think that's a fair
I'm just
question.
asking.
The only reason I'm saying that is because the classroom for pre-K is a much different setting and class size than it would be for middle grades or high school.
Okay, so then through 8th grade.
Right, so even at that, from the facility of the toilet,
Yeah,
right, so it's a very different accessibility. So that's a hard thing to answer, because with the early programs that put in place, those buildings could not handle middle school living in eighth grade.
Okay, so let's back, and I'm just asking, because I've been thinking about this nonstop since we had this, but, so let's just say we're only talking, the school up to 5th grade. Is it possible that those K or 1st through 5 grades are kind of overcrowded because classroom has been allocated to pre-K when we're not mandated by the state to do so? Just asking, yeah.
My understanding of the facility development is that the facilities have been designed for the pre-K. So the question that I have to say that parallels to that is also the readiness of that child for school.
Mhm.
So would the schools be able to be performed, and would the students be performing at the level that they are if they have not received pre-K?
I know,
So-
it's a great question as to whose
So the readiness
responsibility
that
it
we're
is.
providing children with pre-K,
Uh-huh.
does that circumvent
Thank you.
the availability of space? Or the early screening for children that we're providing, does that circumvent additional classification of children in sped if we're catching our kids earlier during interventions? So my brain is thinking both sides, I'm as an economist.
Yeah.
Right, as an economist, right, let's do the math, my numbers don't lie, but as the human perspective of the growth of children.
Yeah, I know, and that's why, please don't take any of my questions.
No, I understand that, well, because there's a fiduciary of the dollar to the public, right,
Right.
to everyone in the room.
So with the expansion of pre-kindergarten, we had to add on to Hilton Head Early Childhood Center to convert it from a half-day to a full-day
Okay.
program. So we built 4 additional classrooms. We built those classrooms out. So there was some retrofitting of buildings in order to accommodate the expansion of pre-kindergarten. And remember, when we expanded pre-K from half-day to full-day, we did not eliminate classrooms, we added classrooms. So if you're looking at a Coosa Elementary School that served two classes of half-day pre-K and 1, we added another classroom to serve the same amount of children. We weren't going to go backwards in that respect. But when you think about a building that was built 30, 40 years ago, pre-kindergarten was not even on anyone's
Right.
mind. I mean, that has
Although
been
both parents also working
Correct.
4 years ago.
correct. And we had that discussion the other day about how the United States as a society now is a 2-income household versus a 1-income household. So both parents are out working. You know, the idea of reading a book when mom and dad get home from work after working a full day is exhausting. I mean, it's just, not something that moms think about the first thing they get home when they get home. They're thinking about dinner and, all of those things. So our society has created some gaps for us that we're now dealing with that we weren't dealing with, 20, 30 years ago.
Who's driving the bus?
Well, from my seat or yours, Mel?
From your seat or from
Well, from my
society's
seat.
seat?
From my seat, I think on a societal issue, it is a societal issue. And when it comes to speaking about changes in society, it's also a mind shift. Those are things we were actually bridging on that conversation earlier today. And the concept of the readiness of a child, and again, to me, and I've said it to us before, the better that child is ready at the early ages, the greater the possibility of the success of that child as they go forward.
Right.
Um,
So what's your, I don't, give me your-
So,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Mel.
So what my mind said about that is, we ought to initiate the change, since we are the educators, in terms of looking at all the possibilities for 70%. Our real goal should be 100%.
Sure.
And, what it takes to get there. I heard the $8 million figure, but what about facilities, etc.? I mean, I don't care if we can hit the surface on that the next 10 years. You know how far behind we'll be then? 30 years behind. We have to address that right now. As you look at those numbers, it's more than just a conversation in my mind. And I want you to think that way in terms of the support we're gonna hopefully get in terms of that, because I think everybody in the community wants better.
Yes.
And I think you know, we're fooling ourselves if we think we're gonna get better by continually going down the same path.
So you're gonna start seeing school districts in South Carolina, put in intervention-based 3-year-old programs. And that's what we're seeing right now, is that where our children are not ready for pre-K, an intervention-based pre-K. And so they're starting to put intervention-based 3K in place. To keep in mind, if you are a SRDEP-funded county, so you know the state's giving you extra funding to provide, it does not fund all of your pre-K needs, but that funding eliminates some of our children that do have a mom or a dad who can afford a pre-K program, but the child is still seeing some developmental delays. So under SRDEP funding, all Medicaid children who receive Medicaid have to be in the program first. And so that's why, one reason why I like Beaufort County's model is because even though mom and dad are both doctors or lawyers, there's still a child that has a potential developmental delay that can be served in our program, but not necessarily in a SRDEP funded county.
But I just, and don't take my questions as any abdication of the interest in supporting early childhood. It's just that I think that we need to, we have this fiduciary responsibility as to, okay, so what does the state say our mandate is? We are chartered, we are mandated to do K-5. Well, we have decided philosophically that early childhood is a crucial foundation to success for later on, right? But you do have to wonder if the state is not providing funding for it, then those dollars that are going for early childhood, when we know that we have middle school concerns, and we know that we have, lots of other areas within that K-12. So I'm just, and then also too, government, is it gonna be pushing out the private sector? You say right now we don't have any waiting list for pre-K.
Pre-kindergarten.
From the 50th percentile.
If they're qualifying,
Right.
they have to qualify
Right.
first, and then you would.
But there's two things that come so forward with that. If we're comparing ourselves within the state of South Carolina, are we comparing ourselves to other performing states or other societies, right?
Mhm.
The societies that perform educationally a little more advanced than we do even as a nation, right, actually place more emphasis on pre-K and early development of the children. So that's one argument. The other argument, even taking a look at it, and I'm gonna step on Mel's toes with this because he was a math teacher. When I take a look at the math standards for us as a state, I have kids doing 6th grade math that technically in other states is a 3rd grade, 4th grade standard. So I think we have to take a better look at who we are, and we're doing that, but who do we really compare ourselves with? Do we compare ourselves within our world of South Carolina, and I've had the same conversation in Florida and in New York, or do we compare ourselves with others who really are providing educational opportunities for children and better career set for children so that we could service our community and society? And that's how I've always looked at education, right? We're supposed to serve our community. So if I'm not giving you the ability to read early, there's a greater chance I'm gonna have a little more illiterate. So,
Yeah, right. Just,
or the haves and the have-nots.
Right.
Because there's other significant issues. And we have to do more for our community beyond cutting ones making beds. I don't mean it in a bad way, I say
Yeah.
it, I'm shutting up.
Yeah.
When you choose
But we have to be, we're educators, but we have to do it with fiduciary practice, and
Yes.
we
And
have
that's
to.
just all
We
as
have to, but we have
past 2
to
weeks.
do more for the community. Period.
When we choose to invest in early childhood, a lot of communities and a lot of states choose not to do it because you don't see a quick return on the investment.
You will by 3rd grade.
You do see it 5, 6, 7 years down the road. If when we converted pre-kindergarten from full day to half day, we were gonna see the benefits of that for 8 years down the road. And so a lot of times superintendents and a lot of time counties and communities don't wanna wait that long. And it's more of a reactive approach. Early childhood is more proactive approach.
And has sustainability. In the long run, it saves the community money. Because that child who now becomes a dropout, do the math in another domain, or do the math in another domain, it still hits us as taxpayers.
Mr. Irvine and then Mr. Kennedy.
Okay, so if we, really, in my mind, the pre-K, the purpose of pre-K is to fill in those gaps that so many of our kids are coming to school with, that don't that have those gaps. And we screen them, so I'm saying if we were to go to 70%, but had an economic component.
A sliding scale
Or
for payment?
or the kids whose parents are doctors and lawyers, they can afford to send them to a private, I get that, but then our job is to collaborate with those private preschools so that we know they're getting the education, to make room for the have-nots, because we have to take care of these have-nots, and it's kind of, I just think it's our duty to take care of the have-nots, sometimes at the expense of the haves.
So may I
Yeah.
speak?
Oh, Mr. Campbell was
Go
saying.
ahead, go ahead.
No, this is Mr. Campbell.
Oh,
I guess I'm looking at it from a different point of view, because I look at what Georgia does. And I had 1, 2, 3, 4 of my grands living in Georgia, and they went through the program that they have. Even if they live in one county and they didn't have enough, they could go to another county and get the same program in pre-K and kindergarten. For us to tackle this problem, we're going to have to either come up with some dollars at the county level or through the state level. Because, they talk about, the governor talks about education reform, but they don't talk, but the people that know about that, they talk to the politicians, So, I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago, and what I am going to do, I am going to talk to other districts and some legislators up in the part of the state to push legislators to come up with some funds, because it benefits the state, because those students, in 5 years, you will see the difference. I saw the difference at Whale Branch Cluster when those kids that was in kindergarten and pre-K and they graduated and went to early college, just about every one of them went to college. So it can be done, but we don't want to talk about raising taxes. Well, if we don't, you're going to have more young people that's out on the street committing crimes. And the other thing that I am pushing right now, working with my council member, is to get the county to bring industry into this county. That will help a lot. So, that's what I'm coming on. Because, Mr. Gaither looked at this when he was superintendent. He started the program in this county. We were the first district in the state of South Carolina to have early childhood education. So, thank you.
So one of the ideas that we've discussed, and when the time comes when we consider it, I'll go to the board and bring forward requests when you were speaking about the haves and the have-nots and going forward. I spoke at school about the opportunity of expanding our Montessori programs and looking at early pre-K Montessori and bringing that to both sides of the river and designing a model that we can then have a sliding scale, so we could create like a cottage industry that, because Montessori is a very demanding program, and put in place a model that if you can afford to pay, you pay, and have a sliding scale so we could create it so it could be self-generating. So those are some of the conversations we're also having, but again, I had to come forward to the board with that request because we've been able to reach out to a training facility to have it localized, so I don't have to pay for teachers to go away. They would come here and I would put them in right choices to train. So I could save money and train more teachers and utilize teachers who have a vested interest here in our county. So that's one of the goals as well. So that now we can look at pre-K Montessori at Beaufort, look at pre-K Montessori down on the south end, and now be able to put a fee-based model in place, and eventually we could pay for ourselves. You know, so that we could grow and we have that right to do that.
And again, please, my questions are just because these are questions we have to vet.
Yes.
Because we have limited funds, we're in the red actually, and, you know, I do believe, you know how every teacher, the high school blames middle school blames elementary, you know how that goes? Elementary blames, well, they didn't have here, that's right.
And they didn't take vitamins.
But I think it's
you know.
really crucial that there's a good understanding of what the state is mandating us to do and what we're choosing to do based on an educational philosophy.
So right now, we as a school district and with board support, we're able to fund 60 full-day pre-kindergarten classrooms.
60 full day.
And that's including early childhood special education. And every elementary school has at least one pre-kindergarten program. To comment about collaborating with child care providers, that is something that we do work hard to do. Keep in mind it is the private sector, and it is a privately owned business. So we have to look at childcare is as a business, because that's what people, you know, when you own a child care center, it is a privately owned business. Not that that's a bad thing by any means, but very different philosophy than how we look at a pre-kindergarten program. They're trying to keep their doors open, and rightfully so. And we're, not that they're not educating children, because that is their ultimate goal as well. But it's a couple different little philosophies there that, just to keep in mind as you're looking at that. Which, going in, we have had several child care providers take full advantage of our trainings that we're offering, and that help with curriculum and things like that, which is a good thing.
And I think one of the things we've added recently is an additional partnership with trained volunteers in the early classrooms. I think we've added on 30 or 60 recently.
I think they said 30 was their
30.
goal, and then 60 was next year.
Next year. So additional volunteers coming into the classrooms, that's basically costing us nothing. But twice a week, that they're doing one-on-one with children,
Nice.
pushing it, yes.
So moving right along, the training opportunities, we talked a little bit about, that's just helping our child care providers provide trainings that they're also able to get Department of Social Services credit for. So, you know, child care facilities are licensed by Department of Social Services. We are providing training hours for them at no cost. If you look at the next column, when you starting looking at pre-kindergarten, about 5 years ago, we created the Child Find Expansion Developmental Screening process. Go back up one more. Yeah. So this is really looking at, so it started out as a grant. We were funded for 5 years, and this has been the first year that the district has picked up to help with funding for this. So we're bringing in on average 400 to 600 3, 4, and 5-year-olds a year voluntarily. So these are referrals from pediatricians, community child care providers, First Steps program or Head Start programs. We're bringing the child in. They're receiving a full comprehensive developmental screening, including hearing and vision. The #1 cause of developmental delay for preschoolers is hearing or vision. And then based on the results of that screening, we are providing recommendations on where the child needs to go from here. So it might be early childhood special education evaluation for pretty intense interventions. We're helping them get connected to a Head Start program or a private child care center in the community, whether they need scholarships or whatever it might be. That's something that we're providing as well. So this is the 7th year this is in operation, and you know, the goal here is that we're providing the interventions the child needs before they get to kindergarten.
But if a child comes in and is below the 50th percentile, you can plug them right into a pre-K class.
If they're age eligible.
So you have room. There's no waiting list, you have room. How much room do you have?
So north of the Broad, we have more room than south of the Broad. Most north of the Broad programs, CUSA is getting pretty full, and what I do with CUSA children that are eligible, they move over to Ladies Island Elementary School. And then south of the Broad, Pritchardville and River Ridge Academy are pretty full, and Bluffton Elementary is now filling up. They are then, we have out of zone classrooms within that cluster that are sent to either Michael C. Riley or Red Cedar.
Okay, so are you at 100% north of the, I'm sorry, you have like 75% available, 50% availability? What's your
It
percentage?
depends on the school. I can't put a number on it because each school is different. But then like at Hilton Head Early Childhood Center, we still have room for there. We built extra classrooms to accommodate space, or for growth. And so, it really just depends on the
Okay.
school,
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's okay,
you know,
that's all right.
But most of the programs north of the Broad all have room.
Okay.
South of the Broad's filling up quickly, and then Hilton Head still has some space.
Okay.
So if you are age eligible for pre-K, yes, you are put into a program. And then we move to the traveling preschool bus. This is a collaborative outreach opportunity for families in the community. So in 2015, we revamped the bus and created the much larger bus. Most of y'all have toured it. It has been a huge hit in the community, and the bus on average is out 1 to 2 days a week, visiting various neighborhoods, apartment complexes. It goes to Department of Social Services this week, and the Bluffton Library next week. So again, another way to capture families and put those interventions in place before they get to us. We find a lot of children who need developmental screening, so then we refer, to Child Find. They're also able to sign up for WIC, Medicaid, and food stamps with our parent educators on the bus. We have provided developmental screenings on the bus, so instead of a family or an apartment complex having to come to us to be screened, we are going to them to be screened. So in the back of the bus, there are 2 little screening rooms. If you've ever been on a bloodmobile, it's very similar to a bloodmobile. So there's 2 screening rooms in the back where we have the opportunity to do that. This is also our opportunity to help parents understand the importance of quality early childhood education. So we use this bus not only as a way to capture families and outreach, but also we provide professional development for child care providers on this bus as well. So our child care teachers can come on the bus, see what a quality early childhood classroom would look like, and then based on that, we might do a professional development in the block center, or how to move children from center to center, things like that. So county council, so through the Human Services Alliance through the county, they also help fund this bus. So we receive about $8,000 to $10,000 a year to help fund this, because they look at it as a multi-agency collaborative.
Yeah.
So
how many total dollars do we get for early childhood from the county?
It depends.
In any regard?
Capacity. We write a grant for this through the county, so this is a grant-funded project through the Early Childhood Coalition. But county council, that would be a general fund question. I don't know exactly.
So the Early Childhood Coalition of the county does provide monies for different types of things?
Yes, so early childhood, it's an umbrella effect. You've got county council, you got Together for Beaufort and Human Service, Fred Lida's office coordinates the Early Childhood Coalition. And then the Early Childhood Coalition decides on several initiatives that we're gonna work through.
Okay.
So for instance, the bus is an initiative. The early learning standards, we received a new document from the state. So we are going right now through and training all of our child care providers, privately owned child care businesses on that document. So how to use the early learning standards, birth to 5. And they also receive the actual book. So the Early Childhood Coalition pays for the actual standard book, then for that teacher who's been through the training.
I'm kind of stuck on this thing. So Tricia asked where we had openings and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So my question is there a certain time of the year where we're like, okay, we're probably not going to get any more kids coming in this year, so we go down to our screening and say somebody who's at the 55th, we can pull that person into the program?
So no. And the reason is because I fill up those pre-kindergarten classrooms with children below the 50th percentile by the end of the school year.
By the end of the school year.
So we're talking about most at-risk children typically follow the most at-risk family.
Yeah.
We do a big push in our district in the month of March, February and March, to register and get a screening, which a majority of them do. But it's when the big yellow school bus goes by the house, oh, I need to go get a pre-K screening. So on average, I'm screening 60 to 80 3, 4, and 5-year-olds a month.
You're busy.
Even now, even now.
Oh, yes.
Now, they are very
Yes.
busy.
All right.
So those 60 to 80 children are parents who are voluntarily bringing their 3, 4, or 5-year-old in, saying, you know, I want to know where my child is developmentally. I want to know if they can get into a pre-K program, that kind of thing.
Do the, does like DIM ever, refer people to,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So MUSC, Volunteers in Medicine, Beaufort Jasper Comp Health, we receive referrals from all over. I even get Jasper County families trying, you know, wanting to screen because they've gone to them or, you know, Beaufort Jasper Comp Health.
That entry level testing, that the 50 percentile, where did we get that test from? Is that a standardized test or is that a Beaufort County driven test?
It is a standardized testing document. So it's the Dial 4. It's the developmental
All right.
indicators for assessment for
Question.
learning.
Okay, I just want to know. Question number 2.
Yeah.
How many students, percentage-wise, make that 50 percentile?
So I have not run the numbers recently, but in the past, on average, screening about 1,200 4-year-olds, 82% of them are falling below the 50th percentile.
It was about at 1,000 when I checked.
Yeah.
And it's in order to meet the 70th.
Resurfacing.
and
600.
we're servicing all.
You're servicing all of them, so you're saying
We're
that
serving 1,000, right at 983
out of 1,200.
out of, usually we have about 1,500 kindergartners entering into kindergarten.
And out of that, about 1,000 are being serviced.
Yes. So there's about 500 or 600, give or take. You know, some never come in for the developmental screening. Some parents just say, you know, I'm not interested. And so we don't see those until they come to kindergarten, but.
Yeah, I'm even concerned about the ones that are not screened. We got no data to substantiate, you know, why we need to do more. But what about those people who don't go, who don't qualify? How do we, there's no way we can measure that calculus of how far we're holding them back. Or despite, you might think we're not holding them back because they're already in a certain percentile, but you know, they potentially are probably doctors and lawyers of the future, and how many of them fizzle out because we're not giving them that early support that they need to have.
So
And-
we're looking at the kids, trying to do apples to apples with the students who have received intervention and who have not. They've just started pulling that data to better work for us, so that we could be able to bridge that conversation. At a cursory look right now, they're just pulling the information for us because when that last time I was bringing that vote, that was a question. So Daniel Shaw is doing that for us, so that we can look apples to apples. But what I'm hearing is, we might wanna go beyond the kids who are at the 50th to the 70th to see where they are as well.
Yes, I'd
And
like us to be data driven in terms of how we're gonna change what we're doing. And
I just
don't have a
have
whole
to
lot of faith.
identify them.
I don't have a whole lot of faith in our state's requirement and their parameters. I think we need to think that we always advertise as being globally, you know,
When-
competitive.
We
Globally
did win.
means more than
Yes.
just beating out Beaufort and Hampton County.
When we started our pre-K expansion back in 2014, 15, and put forth a plan for pre-K for all, keep in mind, we did win the Champions for Children Award for the state of South Carolina. So this was something that we really took seriously. Not only our efforts in expanding pre-kindergarten, but what we're doing for early childhood in Beaufort County. So we are looked at as a state model, and we've got to keep that. It's a lot of pressure.
Hey, we're looked at as a southeastern model that I respected more, or model throughout the country. Ain't a state model, don't really, resonate with me.
The bus went national, the traveling free bus did go
Okay,
national,
good.
yes, there you go.
Do you keep any record of students who have gone for screening and scored between that 50th and 70th percentile? Is there anything that shows that I could?
Yes, we
use
do
as a
have record,
marker?
I have a record of every, and I can't tell you how far I have back right off the top of my head, but I do have a
You do have a
record
record?
of every child screen.
Is it electronically?
Yes.
Then
It's
I might be able to
entered
get that
yes.
data for you that way, Mel.
So the important
Okay,
thing
yeah.
that Beaufort County had to do because of this piece, every child who was screened, we're not only tracking their developmental history, we are tracking their socioeconomic level, what outside services they're receiving, education level of the mother and the father, where their prior preschool experience. I'm trying to think, I'm going down my list. Incarceration of a parent, Medicaid, WIC, food, everything about a child. We're looking comprehensively at a child. So when we can pull data back by socioeconomic level, by developmental level, lots of different things.
Yeah.
And we created that
This is not an
database.
easy task, I
No,
know,
it's not.
but it's where, it's how we need to be thinking in my mind. I need you to be thinking like, what do I recommend? Where do we go? Because like you say, you've been pulling this data together for 5 years. So now you have some programs that are driven, that reflecting the data we've got.
And my proposal was to Dr. Stratus was starting to serve the 70th percentile and
Yes.
below.
Okay, there you go, that's a start. Now with that,
Now we just need some
how much money it's gonna take, yeah.
Ashley, are you aware of any legislation that might be going through or being to help support districts in their endeavors to do early childhood? Because the funding of it is, in our case especially, minimal. And then my second question is, how much does it cost to educate one child? What's the cost for that?
Sure. To answer the first question, I'm not aware of any legislation currently.
Okay.
I have been told for the past several years that we as a county were being looked at to receive SURDEP funding, but that is not in our future, I'm gonna be honest with you. And then, do you know the per pupil allocation off the top of your
No,
head?
not when it comes, because I want to know actually, because it would be it's only
Pre-K is
60,
different.
right.
Pre-K would be
Right, because
different.
it's different.
Right, so you have 983 students being served. I'd be
Yeah.
very interested to know, what does it cost to serve
Certain
one student? What is the
We can
cost per
find that.
Yeah, and you're saying that 2/3 of the students that typically enter kindergarten are being served? They fall below the 50th percentile?
So that number was run a couple years ago. I have not run that number. This was when we were running this number for pre-K expansion. But during that time period, on average, of about 1,200 children, 82% of them were eligible or falling below the 50th percentile.
That time you weren't serving everyone
At
that
that
you are
time,
now.
we were not serving everyone.
Yeah.
So that was in our part of
Yeah,
converting
as you
full
said.
day to half day, expanding pre-kindergarten, building on to Hilton Head Early Childhood Center. So we based our expansion off of that 82 percentile. 82% of children qualifying.
But Trish, I just want to ask, because allocation versus actual costs are not the same. So do you want to know the allocation or the actual costs on the pre-K? Or actually, you want to know both metrics?
Probably both,
Both?
because then we would know the
Yes,
difference between the two.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so traveling preschool bus, we talked a little bit about that. We've talked a lot about pre-kindergarten, but if you look, a lot of a child's brain is developed within the first 5 years. If you look in the corner, 90% of a child's brain happens before the age 5. 70% of a child's language development happens before the age of 3. That's before we even see them. So language across not only our district and our county, but across the nation is one of our lowest performing areas. Our children are just not being exposed to the language that they need prior to, in home, in childcare centers, and pre-K. That is our goal, is language-rich and literacy-rich environments. And so part of pre-kindergarten is lots and lots of read alouds, interacting, playing well in the sandbox, those lifelong skills that you're going to use for the rest of your life. A lot of times we receive children in pre-kindergarten that have pretty large learning gaps. And what I mean by that is the social emotional development component has not caught up to the cognitive development piece. So when you have that, it's a learning gap. And that's where we see children with the lack of self-regulation skills, being able to attend to a task. So a lot of intense intervention has to be put in place in order to regain that skill or concept. We talk a lot about windows of opportunity. So a lot of windows of opportunity happen from birth to 5. And then once those are closed, it can take up to 4 times longer for that child to regain those skills.
Actually, our one-to-one initiative doesn't go all the way down to pre-K, does it?
No. And that is a twofold. 1, we don't have the funding, but 2, it's a good thing. Our children today, we receive children with technology skills of how to manipulate that telephone and that iPad, because it's used as a tool with mom and dad a lot.
Babysitter.
Therefore, our lack of self-regulation a lot of times.
So I need children talking to each other, talking to the teacher, interacting, learning soft skills versus being in front of that device.
Yep.
So we do have creative curriculum in place for our children. We have an assessment system that can track those children. Part of that is the state ready. We have a state readiness assessment that's required for pre-kindergarten. We also have included Learning Without Tears this year, which is a fine motor intervention-based curriculum where we're really helping our children hold a pencil, form letters, build those muscles in their hands to help them write and be able to function, use scissors, those types of things. And then also to align our program, our pre-K program with our kindergarten, 1st grade and up, we use a literacy beginnings curriculum and Fontes and Pinnell. That's by Fontes and Pinnell. You can keep going. So one thing that we added this year with the help and collaboration of First Steps. So we had this program several years ago. It died down, and now we're back up again, which is Countdown to Kindergarten. We were able to fund 30 children of our most at-risk kindergartners this year, and a certified kindergarten teacher, ideally their certified kindergarten teacher, visited them over the summer in the home with a backpack of readiness tools. So scissors, letters, colors, numbers, crayons, where they actually worked with the mom or the parent in the home of what to expect in kindergarten. And it built that homeschool connection with their kindergarten teacher. And I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Melissa Murray. I'm the English Language Arts Coordinator for pre-K through 12th grade. So it is my pleasure to help support literacy in all of our grade levels. But here, obviously, we're going to be talking specifically about what happens starting in kindergarten. So I hope you see there's a tight connection between pre-K and moving into kindergarten. We try to be really purposeful in this to support children moving forward. But as you have probably seen in our district literacy plan, we are a balanced literacy district. And so what that really means is if you can think back to how you were taught to read, if you were taught before the 1977-ish, you were probably taught to read with phonics, a phonics approach. Around
This is no eye contact.
I mean, if. I'm stuck on that word. I'm looking around going. Now, who didn't read Dick and Jane? I mean,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I read Dick and Jane.
So
I did not in school, but I did read Dick and Jane.
me neither. So then, starting around 1980, what research began to show us, because keep in mind, learning to read is not a natural process. So it's very, very, very complicated. So when phonics came to be, that worked for some kids. right? So there was children that were learning to read, but what researchers, scientists, educational leaders realized was it's not working for all kids. And then true what happens in education even now, so we swung this entire different way. Right, so we left all of that behind, even though we knew that it did work for some kids, but they're like, it's not working for all kids. So that period in life was called whole language. And so what that meant was,
I am a whole language
yes.
learner.
Now the disadvantage to that is I struggle with spelling sometimes because you were not taught that, right? You were immersed in books. There was a lot of language. You read often. You were read too often.
Guessed a lot.
Yes, right? Yes, we're making predictions. Yeah, what do you think? What would make sense here? And the cueing systems came from that, but then the research showed that worked for some kids, but not all. And so what balanced literacy intended to do was, and along the same time, we actually learned more about the brain. We were studying the brain more closely, so it solidified some of our research in teaching children how to read again, because this is not natural, so they really had to see how this worked for kids, what triggered. So the intent of balanced literacy is that perfect mix of both. So our elementary classrooms, and we in this district really try to follow this all the way up through high school as well. But it's very important in the elementary classrooms, especially up to second grade, because that is our window to really teach children how to read. So what that looks like and is best taught through is the workshop approach. So when you go and visit our elementary classrooms, that's what you see. And 4 years ago, we did an audit, which you all heard about, of the workshop model. So is this structure in place? And overwhelmingly, we do have that structure in place in our classrooms. And so I call it the catch and release, which means the teacher is doing some whole group instruction at a reasonable amount of time, because their brain can only attend to information for so long. Then they go forth and work. When workshops started, the study shows that what happens in the small group in front of the teacher, the learning just compounds what happens in whole group. So we had to get small group happening in our classrooms. But at that point, you just needed children to be quiet and compliant, so you could focus in on what's happening here. It's much more complex now. They need to be independent learners when they're out in workshop, and then the teacher gets to pull a small group. Then we come back together and we have our next strategic mini lesson. So that's where all of these parts of balanced literacy should fit in, right? So there should be mini lessons that do include phonics, phonemic awareness. There's mini lessons that do include comprehension. There's mini lessons around what does it look like to be a reader, kind of that, and there's next steps in the readerly life. There's mini lessons around writing, conferring, all of those sorts of things. And then they go and practice, teacher pulls small groups, the process starts over. In our elementary classrooms, every elementary school has a minimum of 90 minutes of core instruction with additional 30 minutes, which is called intervention. But the way that we blend it together is it really means it's 120 minutes for ELA every day. So it is intensive, but if you think back to what I just said, where the complication obviously takes place is you have however many kids in your classroom, up to maybe 25, sometimes a little bit more, and they all have their own recipe to teach them to read. So it's tough. And so this starts in kindergarten, and you want to see all of those things happening in real time while teachers are expert kid watchers, taking anecdotal notes, really paying attention to what's working for students. As you can predict, because of what we chatted about as far as pre-K, or even when kiddos come to our doorsteps, which also is probably a good time to note that kindergarten is very different from the way it began and the way that probably most parents perceive what kindergarten should look and sound like. So kindergarten started out as an intervention in and of itself. it was half day. It came from
It
a
was a readiness
reason,
model.
it was a readiness model. You thought of it as like, we have to get them ready for school because we can't get them to first grade and they don't know how to walk in a line and they don't know how to play with friends and they don't know how to do all of these things. So kindergarten started in that way, and kindergarten is very different now. I'll show you this because you probably know this, but
And I do want to remind you, kindergarten in the state of South Carolina is still not mandatory. So we are required to provide it, but in the state of South Carolina, you do not have to send your child. You don't have to send them until first grade.
and if you really think how recently full day kindergarten actually started for us in the state of South Carolina, you know.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
When full day kindergarten, you know, really began in the state of South
When
Carolina.
did it start in this state?
So according to legislation, it kind of started around 85, but my interpretation and understanding is that trickled in a little bit, right? So it wasn't everybody all at once. So,
Started here sooner than it did in Pennsylvania.
wow.
My kids were, one of my daughters was in kindergarten in Charlotte, North Carolina, full day. We moved to Pennsylvania, half day, and that was she was born in 87.
Yeah.
So add 5 to that.
So that's the part I've been trying to land on. Like, when in Beaufort did we really?
I can tell you.
Yeah.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. 95, 96 was half-day kindergarten, and I know 97, 98 was full day. I don't know about the year between, based on my kids.
And keep in mind, and Dr. Travis and I and Dr. Rodriguez had this conversation the other day, keep in mind around the 80s, early 90s was that change when we saw moms started working again. So that socioeconomic, you saw in the 80s, you usually had one stay-at-home parent, generally speaking. And it's when we saw a good shift in delivery of instruction
And outcomes.
and how much a child was prepared or not prepared.
Melissa, that 90 minutes of required ELA for what grades?
So that is actually all of our grades.
Even up through high school? I mean, and
Yes.
in middle school?
Right, so
And you're saying it's happening?
no, not
Okay.
in middle school.
Okay, I didn't think so.
Right,
It's not-
we,
Yeah, not a structured reading, because at that point, that's a whole other wish
Right.
list.
it is a
So
wish
I
list.
don't wanna step on the,
Right.
but it's a wish list, because it's not a structured reading, because at that point, it should be
It's,
prescriptive and remedial to now assist those gaps again.
Yeah. So what's the required or outside recess time for kindergarten and first, second, third grade?
There's not
there's not
necessarily a
any.
requirement for recess. We
Right.
do in our district, highly suggest from the district level that kindergartners receive at least 2 recesses a day,
For how long?
15 to 20 minutes per session.
Okay.
And that's only been in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. So previously, they might have already
Previously, they were only
received
receiving one, maybe a 15-minute.
Yeah.
But that is not, there's no mandate for
Yeah.
us for that.
And I didn't
Although
say
it's
no,
the
but
right
I was
thing
just
to do
trying to
for
compare
children.
90 minutes of ELA instruction in kindergarten, but you 15 minutes outside. But
Which is why we need to make workshop work for the
I
kid.
mean,
Yes.
I've had kindergarten teachers that those kids don't even know they're in school.
Right.
They are playing, they are learning through play. It's amazing if you have.
And that is how this child learns. That's authentic. That is what we hope for. Now, the sense of urgency is there though, because starting in 2012 with Common Core, the expected readability of children grew tremendously. So, this is an example of what children at the end of kindergarten should be able to read.
at the end.
At the end of kindergarten. But just put into context, do they all come knowing their name or the
Letters.
sounds? So colors, numbers.
Is that part of that peak, you have a KRA, the kindergarten readiness assessment would be that, right?
So the kindergarten readiness assessment was the legislation that likes us to do that because it is actually analyzing pre-K programs.
Private and public funding.
Right.
So
Just
one of the
to see if they're
things,
ready.
Yes.
one of the things that came up in earlier conversation with the notes I gave you the page,
Yes.
but
I haven't lost it.
Ashley had said a very important statement that we're actually building our own gap. And if you think about who we place, put your principal hat on, right? Who do you place at kindergarten? Well, it's not an accountability year. Put Mary there.
Oh, no.
But do you understand though?
Exactly.
You see, right. So I think that's a conversation we also have to have as a district, as an intervention, is who are those at the early grade really teaching our children? Because if we have that foundation there, that statement of don't worry, it's an accountability year won't come up later. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that was a
We are seeing a
conversation.
shift in research. You know, the pendulum swings and then they swing back. But we're seeing a shift in research and across the nation, in our state as well, of going back towards more play-based, developmentally appropriate kindergarten. So I do know in Spartanburg, they changed their entire kindergarten model to a play-based kindergarten model.
Makes a difference.
I have not seen it in action yet, but I am hearing some things, some positive things. We're creating learning gaps because of the structure of the way we're teaching our kindergartners. A 5-year-old is not meant to sit in a chair for more than 5
Or in a
minutes.
square.
Yeah. And honestly, if a 5-year-old doesn't want to sit in a chair and stand and do their work, that is okay. But we are driving the mindset of it's a mind shift change, and the pendulum is needing to swing back a little bit, and research is showing that we need to do that.
And then you would have a lesser amount
It's
of
always
boys being classified SLD.
Yes.
We are seeing a larger number of preschool and kindergarten children being suspended and expelled from schools across the nation because we are creating, and I'm saying this as a general statement, not developmentally appropriate practices.
Right. We're putting them in a can as tuna.
Right. So,
But purposeful play is. It's important
Yes.
and very tricky. This is why it's extremely difficult to be a kindergarten teacher.
It is.
And
Yeah.
so you set up their world so they
Yes.
are learning and they're playing.
Play
You know,
is facilitated through the teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of our standards, starting in kindergarten, say with support, with guidance and support. So in ELA, for the state standards, they carry on through. So they have this anchor standard, which is what college and career ready looks like. And then there was an attempt to backwards design it, so that's what it looks like at high school, 12th grade, 11th grade, so on, all the way down to kindergarten. So the language in the kindergarten standards all include with some guidance and support. That's not to say that there isn't high expectations, and even the way our kindergarten teachers were taught to teach or were taught themselves, what instruction looks like now is different, right? So because all of our standards are asking kiddos to be critical thinkers on some level. So the easiest example is we're still doing read alouds. Let's hope there's a lot of them. The brain isn't even ready to learn to read until it has heard 1,000 books. So when you have a child that walks into you as a 5-year-old and doesn't know how to hold a book, we can assume that they did not come from a literacy-rich home. So, right away, what do we have to do? They have to hear 1,000 books. And so the easy math, right? Like there's 365, that's at least 3 books a day for the whole year. We don't get them that much. So, there's a lot of reading that has to happen. But the follow-up to it is before, your teacher probably read to you, and then it's like, what was your favorite part? Or like, let's turn back to here. Now you can do that, but you're also asking those higher order questions, but you're guiding them to it. How do you think that character was feeling? How do you know? Right.
How do you
What did
know?
the illustration do? And then we're setting up that how do you know, so that they're for future success. So in a nutshell, this is what happens for those sweet, amazing kindergartners that walk through our door. There's a lot of assessment that has to happen of them to see how ready they are, letter, sound ID, same thing happens with numbers. But it's in an effort to best serve them and meet their needs. In blue, what you see, what I'm moving towards or trying to do is the South Carolina College and Career Ready standards. these are very, very different standards than the way most teachers were taught to teach. And my oversimplification is, you used to be able to find a noun and a verb and get the gist of what instruction should be. These standards are huge and include a lot of context. They get very specific. But back to this learning gap, regardless of where the children come to us, our model, what we do whole group, what we support children with, needs to be grade level appropriate. So I still have to teach them to think like a kindergartner, what that looks and sounds like. So I'm going to guide them through the types of questions that are being required of them, activate their thinking, because then the beautiful thing is, when we get them on level as readers, which is more prevalent later, then they can read like a third grader and think like a third grader, right? So we have done a lot of work since the new standards have come out of unpacking them, coming to consensus as coaches of what does this look like for mastery. Many of our Summer Institute sessions were all around our standards, not saying like, you know, we had to jazz it up with a cool title, you know, no lie, but we are trying to make that be this common language of what do those standards really mean for us. The other thing that we're really working towards is, through our audit and through our data, for the past 3 years, I've been really working with coaches around, let's name something, and we are now at a point where everybody is willing to name that when we think of balanced literacy, the part that we haven't done as well as the others is our phonics, phonemic awareness instruction. And that is essential and integral. To oversimplify it, if we think of that bell curve, let's just say, you know, there's 15 to 20% of the kids that's how they're going to learn how to read. And then the other end, there's 15 to 20% that don't need it at all to learn how to read. And then everyone else is somewhere in between. They need that little bit of whole language, a little bit of phonics. So in all of our schools, we did it, the pilot started inside of guided reading. So when we get them in front of us with the level text that they're on, what developmentally are the appropriate sounds, blends, should they be learning ongoing? That has to happen in that 5 minutes inside of that guided reading. What bubbled up is that we needed a little bit more. And so we now have, when I first did this, it was 18, so I did bring the correction. All schools have had added whole groups phonics instruction at tier 1 also. And all of the phonics instruction chosen there's also a tier 2 instruction that can happen. What that actually means though, keep in mind tier 2, that gets tricky in Beaufort County because we have interventionists, we have people that can serve tier 2 at kindergarten. That actually means that little bit of strategic support that can happen inside of the classroom. Right, it might not be for all, but I'm going to pull a small group around phonics instruction, and I have something that I'm holding on to something for that the schools are trying out. So in this grade level, that is our, we're working on that currently. Yes.
Okay, I'm jumping to the back page where you're talking about the assessments for that. And you say you're using school-based assessments. Are they common across but you don't use Dibbles here?
No,
Is
Dibble-less.
Huh? Dibble-less?
Yes.
There's Dibble, but they are common across all the schools. It's not what each school coming up with their own assessment.
Right, so there's this core set that's common across everybody, and then when we get into progress monitoring, or if there's a strategic intervention that's happening, then that comes from a vetted list, because it has to be research-based. Not to say that there isn't some formative assessments that are happening individually in classrooms, but at a minimum, there is a consistent set of assessments.
That's the gathering
But
data.
Kathy noted the kindergarten, I believe they also get map testing. And I was trying to find if we could use Dibbles and Will, and it's not on the list to be selected.
Oh, that's too bad because
But
actually
it
Dibbles,
came up from
I think
conversation.
Dibbles would give us more information than math at
So,
kindergarten, but.
yes, the only Dibble 6 is what we're allowed to use, but it won't circumvent the MAP utilization, but it can be used for dyslexia screening.
Yeah.
MAP is moving towards what they call a fluency test, which is more similar to what
Dibbles
was
has
did
a
with
fluency
Dibbles.
component, but it's got the phonemic awareness, it's got concept of print, it's got all that in one
And
assessment.
they did that with the MAP fluency, but I do agree because, yes, well,
Yeah. Okay,
we'll
no,
chat.
that's
We will
all right.
chat about
That's
that at
just
great
like-
length, yes, because it needs to do two things, but,
But you said you're doing the F&P with kindergarten too, right? For level literacy?
ish. So what that means is, so concepts of print happens first. So if they aren't showing signs of that they know how to hold a book, turn pages in a book, then they're not ready for that yet. So then they are put in as a pre-A. So our other data shows, I mean, if they don't know their letter sounds, they don't know how to hold a book.
Right.
We're not
Units of
gonna
study.
suffer them through that. That comes when they've shown signs that they're reading.
Okay.
And then we get the fontes Pinel. So there's an end fontes Pinel for everybody. But the beginning, that's when you see pre-A, is they weren't ready for it yet. And that is a majority of our kids.
I would think so, right?
Right.
You're not expected to come
No.
to school and learn how to read in kindergarten.
No, I mean, Common Core would want you to, but
Yes,
that's not.
it's another
Right.
extreme.
And it
Right.
depends on the last.
Yeah.
Honestly, yes.
That's what you were bringing up earlier.
Right.
And I think this, although maybe with good intentions, this is somewhere where I think we have to be really cautious and tread lightly, because we want to do well for our children and teach them to read, but sometimes it's easier to get them through levels in a younger grade, and then it can start to fall apart. So I think we have to be really strategic with being aware of where they are developmentally, what they're ready for, paying attention to, so all of our schools now have this guide. You see my tabs that connects it back to all of our principles of reading standards, which is what the state gives us to say that they can't do all of this other stuff. Like, that's how you learn to read. It's a start. It's not all encompassing, but this helps show us that there's certain sounds, certain letter combination sounds that aren't appropriate yet. Right? That doesn't mean some children can't do it. Of course they can, which means then it's developmentally appropriate for them. But for other children, our controlled vowels, it just doesn't make sense. They're not going to do that yet. That happens for a lot of kids in the middle of first grade. You know what I mean? So
Reading truly does depend on the developmental continuum. So a child reads when they're ready.
Yeah.
So when they're ready and they have those skills, no matter how much we want to push that, it's still going to happen based on a developmental continuum.
but we're setting them up for success, and we're giving them lots of opportunities to be engaged. We're giving them like patterns, we're giving them systems, something to fall back on, strategies. So when it starts to click, it's gonna all come together for them. It's all stored somewhere, it's just not retrievable yet, you know.
But one of the things is you hear the expertise at their language understanding. So that's another point of conversation, right? As you're looking at literacy, what are we doing with regard to building that capacity in the educator? So that's the other side of the conversation that needs to be brought to the table when you're looking at is literacy as an intervention. How are we getting this level of capacity within our teachers who are pre-K through grade 5?
1000% agree with that statement.
But it's a necessary conversation now, and I did have a short conversation with the local university about that. They are starting a program, but they're gonna need help at that start. So I think that's another intervention for us to look at, because not only do you wanna give access to, but I wanna give you access to highly qualified teachers with quality instruction.
And there's a logic behind, if you're going to USCB, you
That's-
probably wanna teach in Beaufort or
Right.
Jasper, or, you know, if you're getting your education degree locally, you probably are applying for jobs with us locally, so.
Hopefully locally, so
Yeah.
that's something else I think at some point we need to have a healthy conversation about, on how are we building that capacity.
I do get the opportunity to kind of, you know, fly in and do something, but I do agree that if it was more strategic and comprehensive.
They are
that would-
adding a master's program in reading, and if you develop a greater amount of cooperating teachers, every teacher who does acts as a cooperating teacher, they're able to get a course for $15. It's $5 a credit. Yeah, so that's just something that I think we need to build that conversation more.
Agreed, because I would love lots of people with their masters.
Yeah. So now they also go to another salary level.
Right. So we also, in pre-K, there is Learning Without Tears and Literacy Beginnings. And so Ashley and I do have a goal to continue to grow that partnership. So Literacy Beginnings, is, you know, that's not at the same cost. It's more of a resource, more PD, building this common understanding and growing. Learning Without Tears are materials, so that there is a little cost to that. We want them in conjunction because we need to believe in kindergarten that when children are learning how to form letters, identify letters, they also need to be hearing the letter sounds. So all of that starts to happen at the same time. Because again, when they're ready, then all of it will connect for them. The other is helping to focus on play-based learning. And again, what that really means is that purposeful play. And I know that that looks uncomfortable for some people that aren't from an early childhood background, but when you really dig in, there's a lot of work happening, and they're really engaged in reading and writing in this authentic way. Because keep in mind, a high progress literacy classroom, we really want kiddos to be reading or writing, actively engaged in text for 75% of the time. So that means that, you know, that's what you're doing in all of your centers, workshops, when you're around the room.
And is, I just can't remember, kindergarten one-to-one?
Yes, they have the
And they bring it-
iPads.
Yeah, do you think that's beneficial?
So here's where that gets tricky. I think that we have to be strategic on not using technology for the sake of technology. However, I do believe that that's the world in which they live. So in ELA, it's tough for me because I still get this like idea that they have to have their hands on something. If it's planned for and they are guided in the right way to find like the really nice image with the text to go alongside it. There's ways to take notes, but I'm thinking slowly in kindergarten right now, right? Because the other side of that is I actually feel like children at a younger age have to practice the actual keyboarding skills. So up second grade, I'm saying, because by third grade they have to put that into action. So we have this really high expectation for them to now start typing all of their essays,
But they've never had keyboard before.
right.
I truly think, I'm sorry.
No.
The one-to-one device, kindergarten through second grade, I think it's a great resource. I don't necessarily agree that it needs to be a one-to-one piece.
Yeah,
I think children need access to it, and we as a district need to define that balance of what that looks like for a teacher, because I think some teachers need the guidance of what a balance looks like.
So I know IT has actually done an initiative, and a little information came from Karen on it as well by group. And then I followed with Christy that they're putting 2 desktops per classroom at second grade, at least to help build a learning station. You know?
In addition to the one-to-ones?
Yes, so they could more the keyboard work and development than just on the tablet.
how many do you, oh, sorry.
Right.
So at the kindergarten level, rather than having one-to-one, like what you were talking about when the teachers are walking them through, I'm thinking, you know, could you have 6 in each
Yeah.
classroom and do that full
Right.
substation
Station.
versus that one-to-one? Just because when I talk to parents, and I have a 3-year-old grandson, if he gets hold of my husband's iPad, forget it.
Yeah.
You know? And
He's in his own world.
And he gets into things and like, you know, he called 911 one time because, you know, he's just doing something. Yes, we're like, no clue.
He's approximating.
I will say, during kindergarten registration this year, so this year was the first year I really noticed it. During that kindergarten registration time, we had more parents calling with concerns about how long their kindergartner was going to be on iPad. It was a difficult question to answer. We received a lot of phone calls at the district office, or in my office regarding that. And it's because they had been to schools and toured the school and seen children. But it was definitely a concern for parents and I can't define, because we don't have a definition at the district level of how long a kindergartner can be on an iPad. But there were parents that chose different programs.
But the medical.
Right, as a-
with the
yeah.
classroom connection.
Yes.
And then it has to be balanced. with
I was just saying, I
at
don't
home.
think that is consistent classroom to classroom. I
It's-
volunteer enough to know that certain teachers use it more than others.
Oh, absolutely.
And also, I just wanted to say, this hasn't been in place all that long, this one-to-one in the lifetime. I have 3 children. They all went to kindergarten in Beaufort County, and none of them had one-to-ones, and they're all top of their class, and they all can type. So, and they all know how to use computers, so I really don't see that as a requirement, and I didn't allow it in my home when they were that age, or, even up until, I think the first time any of them were on it was that Odyssey Compass Learning.
Right.
For the summer,
For
for
the
1
summer
hour,
program.
that was,
Right.
and that was the extent that they got.
I think the quality that the teachers are using it too, like I talked to a 2nd grade teacher who uses it very thoughtfully.
Right.
Right, and is very focused in how she does it, but that may not be, the case.
And that's-
She's a very experienced teacher.
That's truly where I struggle, because there are places where it does make sense and that's the way the world works. But that doesn't mean that there's not room to solidify best practice around it. And in many districts that have done one-to-one, that's the way of the future, but it's still so new.
Gradually release.
Yes.
That's, all good intentions have a good intention.
Yes.
Yeah, it goes back to the core of our direction, where we're going with the children and eventually society. And I think the concept now of more socialization in kindergarten is a rewriting of the rules, because we're getting so much on the computers until we don't even know how to talk to each other, and things like that. And besides, just socialization changes the way the system works, the way people work. And I think we're finding out that with all the good things that the computers do, it's kind of also undercutting our society.
Absolutely,
degree.
it creates anxiety, we know that's grown
Right, that's
tremendously in
why
our
we're
kids.
driving a different early initiative now, and that's why it's fundamental that we're driving that early initiative in the proper sense.
Right.
But not so much
There's research,
technology early.
and I know we've talked about the research that actually with our children from the American Academy of Pediatrics that states that screen time for children from birth to 5 is actually hindering the development of the frontal lobe.
I did see, I read that actually.
And I have to say honestly, and we are contributing to that,
Yes, we are.
and that's something we need to look at.
So I think we really do need to look at that as a district, as to the computer usage in our early.
So one of the things that, as I'm doing school visitations and we're observing lessons, one question that we're posing to principals is, how would that lesson look differently if there was true integration of technology, of a tool for learning, not for learning, versus giving 3 in-depth questions, having the kids do research, letting the kids present their research versus just using it to look up and do a rote level of learning. So
Which could have been, right.
so we're trying to build capacity of maybe a lead person in this set, like Well Branch Middle is one of the schools we're working with, to look at a point person in each area, because they could be broken up into 3 areas, and let them be the point person, lead person for better technological integration. So take a very talented teacher, and how would your lesson be restructured better?
But is that what our tech coaches do?
Well, they do, but how about if I build her capacity to be that person within my own school at time, and they're not there all. Mel, you're driving the bus, this is the feedback I receive
There you go.
from some, depending on my capacity of this, but I am a master teacher. If that makes sense what I'm trying to, and they're
Yeah,
not there
absolutely.
all the time.
Right.
They're not, and, cause you don't have a 1-to-1 ratio, the they're not there all the time, the coaches. So can we build your capacity a little more, so you could be that lead person in that west wing of the school? And I trust you a little. So,
Oh,
if that, I, you understand So
Now you are.
we're trying to build it, Kathy, we're trying to build it more
Yes.
at that,
I
yeah.
understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so we talked about play-based, and then we touched on this, the way that I tried to word this nicely was highly effective teacher of students learning to read. So, it is something that we have to just address or name, that because of a high level of accountability, what happens. And we are a school district that hires new people every single
Every day.
year. So I know it's a delicate balance and it's really, really tricky, but teaching a child to read is different than teaching a child to learn through reading. And it's really, really complex. And, you know, I have a master's in it, and I still really engage in a lot of reading and figuring problem solving and figuring that out, right? So,
But it's so crucial to have those highly effective teachers, because you know what is the adage? You learn to read until 3rd grade, and then you read to learn. So if you can't read, you know, from 4th grade on, the rest of your life, you're reading to learn. Now, some people are saying that visual is taking over a lot of the reading, but it's gonna be a long time until that happens.
right.
And if we truly see this early childhood shift as a investment, and I'm gonna say it for you, we truly have to have our best teachers in our most formative years. And we have to name it. And we have to hold our administrators and our district accountable for putting our best teachers in those grades.
Or at least partnering to develop that.
Oh,
absolutely.
With the university,
Yep.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
Because
And taking advantage of our
Right,
masters.
and I think
Right.
that every teacher that I would interview, my question was always, how do you teach a child to read?
Exactly.
And if they couldn't answer that question, they weren't coming to my building because they, you know, and it's
No,
amazing.
I always ask, what is balanced literacy?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, why are you asking that question again? Because if they need a good answer, if they don't have.
And these people are coming right out of top universities and they can't answer, how do you teach a child to read? There's a problem in our
they teach
preparation.
about vocabulary.
Right, so you almost need some sort of follow-up. If you really drill down, or you remember back to your program of study at the undergrad, your reading courses most likely were you gathered a collection of books that were really good. You, depending on your age, you know, you would make a project that went along with it. But many of our undergrad courses is that it's very surface level of teaching someone to read, and although that's such a complex thing. I mean, one of my favorite article titles, there's been lots of good articles, but someone named it "Teaching Reading is Rocket Science." And I'm like, yes,
Well,
I can resonate with that.
Melissa, I, you know, once again, this is such a complex issue that, you know, I apologize for only providing 2 meetings for it so far. Because
Sorry.
we're certainly gonna have to go into a 3rd,
Okay.
because it's 20 till 5, and we've only gotten through kindergarten.
Yes.
But it's
It does
crucial.
get faster since the.
It does, yeah. Read from the other ones, it's very similar.
I don't know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I'm
it's a lot of
happy
questions.
to, yeah, no, I'm happy to come back.
So if we could, you know, and we'll work with Dr. Stratos on what time and, you know, I know that this time frame might be better for you versus, you know, the public, but it might be better for the public, to, you know, if we start a little bit later, but we can work that out.
Yep.
All right? We just have a couple more things on the agenda that we have to get to.
No, I appreciate your time.
And I want to reiterate that, I think that early childhood is very important, but I also think it's really important to ask the questions about and to recognize the fiduciary responsibility we have. You know, recognizing that the state is not supporting it to a level that it needs to be supported according to what we think, and legislature is not on the forefront, and we were not part of that Abbeville case where we're receiving any funds. That we just really have to make sure that if the academic committee is going to support this and to the rest of the board, that we, fully understand what it is we're getting into. And then lastly, I just want to say, I am thrilled to hear that this balanced literacy, because we've had this reading and writing workshop, this whole thing for 12+ years, and we're not, I'm thrilled to hear that phonics is coming back, but again, it's only going to be if the teachers are trained in being able to teach
Yes.
that.
And we can talk about that further, but I have been trying to be very strategic and comprehensive around implementation of that.
And with regard to proper questioning and inquiry, the GT models, we are extending that out to non-GT teachers.
I'm seeing that in the
Yeah.
Montessori classroom for my upper
We're just-
Montessori student.
So we're extending training opportunities for inquiry process, which is actually comes out of our GT funding to open it up to
Great,
others so that
yeah, absolutely.
meet that expectation, right? Use
Okay, Mr. Campbell, did you want to say?
No, good.
Okay.
I was gonna comment about, if it's all right. When we were talking before about the early childhood component in the pre-K, I emailed you just a few minutes ago about a study by Furman University, and you probably have read it before, maybe you haven't, but it's about, they did a study, the Riley Institute did a study on public Montessori education in the state of South Carolina. And so I sent you a news article about it, but I mean, if you're familiar with Montessori, basically it's a program that was originally designed to teach students in poverty, through practical life and through play. And so, now, of course, it's the 21st century and we teach it in our public schools. South Carolina has a very active public Montessori program already. And they have tracked these kids from, kindergarten through and found that they do perform better than their socioeconomic peers. Yeah. So there is evidence for that, and I think you're right, if you are gonna go to the full board and then later county council maybe even for additional funding, you have to be rock solid in your justification for more money. And so studies like that are out there to show, and I think your idea of doing even a sliding fee scale, and using it as a training opportunity for our local teachers, it gives our teachers more investment to stay.
Yes.
So,
and it would be good if we could look at maybe the development of some type of foundation for literacy. Beyond the Literacy Coalition, that actually a foundation for building for early grades, so we can go beyond our own state funding, but develop private sources.
yeah.
So we absolutely want you to come back, this is such a critical area.
Yeah, in our spare time, right?
And well, I'm sure we're gonna, we're gonna need to revisit this many times. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies.
The next thing on the agenda, well, first of all, if we could just take a look at the agenda, and go down to the review of the ARs, and I would just like to recommend that we table that till our next meeting in November, and just now finish up with the discussion of a school start date waiver.
Okay, so are you making a motion that we table that? Do we have to make a motion? I don't know. She seconds it, vote.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so discussion of a school start date waiver. Just a little background about this. This is one of the things that the board decided was going to be an initiative of ours to try to get some change, and for many reasons. Not just because of our weather, but because of our early graduates, our dual enrollment, and myriad reasons. And so we sent that letter that Kathy penned and to the legislature, and one of the primary things was the start date.
That was the number one.
It was the number one thing. It came to our attention last week.
Karen sent it.
Karen did, and so did Terry Bennett. That Pickens County received a waiver for their early start date. And it's an online process that you have to undergo to request this waiver. And they did it by requesting it to the State Board of Education. You have to do it 60 days out prior to their next meeting. So if they're meeting January 15th, then you would have to do it by November 15th. So whatever 60 days out of that would be. And they listed different, reasons and which statutes and so on they wanted some flexibility from, so on, and they received it. You want to add to that?
Yeah, what I'd like to add to that is an important piece, is the statute that allows you to apply for a waiver. That statute's only open if you are a school of choice. So they, in their letter, and they went to their board before, and they reclassified all their schools as schools of choice based on the fact that they do virtual learning for some of their courses. So once they met that statute, that they were schools of choice, because that's what the law says. The law says you can apply for a waiver if you are schools of choice. So once they met that, then it was almost like they had to be, the waiver had to be approved. So I would read that letter that they wrote and just look at it and see what.
Is it possible, maybe through board,
Well,
you request their
we've done that
application?
we've done that one time at a board meeting where we went through, we listed each and every school and to create a waiver for each school, because we couldn't do the whole thing, and but we have done that once before as a board.
And it got submitted and rejected?
Yes.
It was rejected.
It was
Okay.
rejected.
All right, so I'm just thinking that this is,
Each school was named each school was listed as a school of choice, and we had to say what the choice was at each school, and it was a motion for all 32 schools, or like if it was Lee and me, every school had a waiver.
So theirs just says they made their whole school district school of choice.
Schools of choice.
And they based it on their high school programming. They didn't mention anything because they said they have their 12-week and 8-week things that they talked about.
2 20-week
Two
sessions.
20-week sessions. But they didn't mention, the only thing that they really alluded to in that letter was the high schools, not the.
They didn't question the elementary or middle school model.
They just said our whole school district, Pickens School District is a school of choice. So I would just, they found a way around it
Right.
so that they could be granted that waiver.
And they asked for a waiver for a variety of things, though. It was the, state read 5929 and read 43231, and they just went on to list a number of things.
Class size regulations, I believe. Another one was teacher certification.
It was.
Those are kind of slippery, but.
But that might have been for their virtual learning. Anyway,
Yeah, maybe.
the door's been open. That's
Right.
that's our whole
That's
point
right.
here. The door
Precedent
has
was
cracked
set.
Yeah.
because a county has received a waiver for an earlier start time based on what they feel they need to best serve their students. And so it seems to me that since this is our number one priority, that we might try to wedge that door open even more.
Is that something that you'd like us to research here?
Well, I think that as a member of the academic committee, I would like to bring this forward to if the academic committee agrees, to take it to the full board and ask the full board to ask that you move forward and research that. I mean, that would be, I don't know, Mel, how do you feel?
I feel like it should have been done.
So we can say we have,
do.
that the academic committee then
Would
bring this
bring
forward.
this to the full board and make a motion to direct the superintendent to have the school district request a waiver and, based on early graduation, dual credit enrollment, equal semesters, all of those things. Whatever you brainiacs wanna come up with, but that would really benefit our students to do that, to have this home rule. I mean, we're supposed to have home rule. Let's make it go here.
Would you agree?
John?
Might I suggest that you make a motion to have the superintendent apply for a waiver and leave it at that?
Mm-hmm.
And let the superintendent figure out what needs to be
Oh,
done.
absolutely.
That's what we're, yeah,
Just
that's our plan.
slip it in the crypt note there.
Right.
You gotta- you
To
gotta-
request a waiver for the opening school start date. So,
We really
Do
only
we
talked
need to-
about 3 days.
Yeah.
do we need to craft the motion right now, like the actual wording?
I have a motion, move to the full board that to direct the superintendent to request a waiver for opening schools.
Start
For an early start
Early
date,
start.
Early start
for
date.
an early start date
Yeah.
when opening schools.
Right.
Or to open schools prior to the third Monday in August, which is what the state rule says.
Yes, it does.
Prior to
And actually, we would have to act soon because we have to work on a calendar anyway.
Exactly, so that's
So
why.
we need to have some information from the state level on their calendar
Yeah.
regarding their meetings in order to get it into the 60-day window.
Yeah, I looked that up online the other day.
Okay.
It's,
So we're still,
it's easy to find
Yeah.
online.
okay.
Okay,
February.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we agree to do that? All three of us? All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, great. So the ARs, going just back to those, we do have 3 that we do need to look at in the near future. And we'll do that. We decided our next meeting was November 20,
I had the 20th.
yes, I believe it was November 20. Yep. Yes, and we are looking at PE 1.2, PE 1.9, and then we'll be looking at the ARs for virtual learning, graduation requirements, and medical homebound instruction. Those 3 ARs.
And the meeting is at McCracken.
McCracken at 4:30.
Yes. Anything else?
You think that's enough?
Dr. White said she was presenting on the 20th to you all. Do you know what that was? She mentioned it to me yesterday.
I didn't have anything on her for the 20th for Dr. White on SPED.
Okay, I'll ask her.
Yeah,
She mentioned it to me the other day, maybe
Yeah.
she thinks, maybe it's a different.
yeah, I didn't have anything from us
Yeah.
that had come forward from SPED yet.
All right,
Okay.
motion to adjourn? I move. Second, all in favor? Thank you.